I'm just moving it out of the way because I take it every few minutes. This symbolically, incidentally, is a Star Island bell. It was brought by Carl here today to use this beautiful sounding bell. Well, thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to follow an incredible sermon today by Vivi. In a sense, my talk today, this presentation, will be a follow-up of his sermon today. So I'm hoping that you will see this as a piece of the same puzzle, if you will, that we're all here to understand and grow with. And in addition to that, I wanted to start off by, I'll be talking about biocultural evolution and food, but I really wanted to start in a different place, in honor of a friend and a colleague who passed away. And this is Ward Goodman. He's a former president of IRAS, a very distinguished anthropologist in his career, and Ward was an incredible mentor and personal friend of mine as I matured, and he lived until approximately, I think he was 94 when he passed away this June. And so it was reasonably recent that that occurred. It's on the front page of the website, actually, for the IRAS website. But many of you probably don't know him as an anthropologist, but also as a very, well, we'll hear more about him in the memorial service, but I'll just say he was also a poet. And it's to his poetry that I'll just dedicate this opening. If I can, let's see if I put this thing. So, this takes place in the island of Truk. The island is, as you can see, I think on this side, the island of Truk. Oh, I wish you can't see because this projector takes a while to do. So, future people who use this projector need to know that it will work in a few moments. It focuses itself every time you've changed the settings on it. So, but this is the island of Truk in Micronesia, to give you a sense of where it is. And this map, I put the Truk right on the map, even though Truk never appears on any of the maps because it's such a tiny little island. Here is it's now named Chuck. But his work took place there, and this is a sonnet. And you'll understand more about why he would have written a sonnet. But it's the fish of sufficiency is the name of the sonnet. He's here on the left, on the right, sorry, standing next to one of the native men that he became very friendly with when he was a young man, working as a cultural anthropologist. And these are some of the traditional Fisher people that live there just below. We meet hither now in order to stone grow under feeling stone, core of the middle. Grope we not crazily, let us grope truly, groping grasp out the fish of sufficiency, food of lady learned, food of lady skilled. It shall be food of chiefs, it shall be food of commons, to be learned and skilled. In essence, this is what my cup is about as well. It's the issue, many issues, one of them is sufficiency. When is enough enough? That's what I talked about last night in some respects as well. So, what I'm going to be doing is leaving this on so you can take a look at the text below. I hope you can see it. But what I am going to do is be decide to change the whole thing at the last minute. So here are the real notes, but the real paper is here. So I'll start here. Integrating the origins and fundamentals of the human food system from an evolutionary perspective provides a series of key insights for understanding contemporary food problems and guiding secure, safe, and sustainable choices for their potential solutions. In essence, understanding the origins and development of the basic building blocks of a food system helps clarify both the limitations and successes of the human food system in the evolutionary natural history of our past, and lays out a framework for how to guide plans for our future. As George Sayana's warning that, quote, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, end of quote, can be restated as an initial perspective into our conference. Those who do not understand the evolutionary history of our past are condemned to miss its insights into solving the problems of our future. That's my point. That's the point of my talk. So, now, these insights arise out of a reinterpretation of human natural history as a series of revolutions involving the interplay between biology and culture, which expanded the carrying capacity of the human ecosystem and help explain our current condition. In essence, the cumulative biobehavioral cultural system, which is sort of on the slide I'll explain in a moment, in which new knowledge evolves and is transferred from one generation to the next, provided an enormous extrasomatic, outside of our body, information system that both supplements and complements our biological or genomic capacities as a species to survive and prosper. This information system has given an enormous selective advantage in an evolutionary sense to our species because the limits of the carrying capacity of our environment over time have been successfully overcome by developing new technologies to significantly enlarge our food resources. Other species have largely been limited by the availability of the food supply. Our success has led to greater growth of human population size and fitness in various environments where these new technologies work. So that's my point of introduction. Now for this slide. So in essence, this suggests, sorry, these things are very sensitive, you can't pass the line on. This suggests that the biological information is one system that every species, of course, has. And it operates, and we have evolved over time a higher cortical central nervous system that uses language and behavior, something that Ward Goodenough spent his entire career dealing with, the cognitive side of language and socialization. And we look at the interface between that and the sociocultural information. And until contemporary times, until roughly the origins of writing, etc., all of our sociocultural information was stored in the form of myth and ritual and traditions, and it was an oral tradition. So until we had writing, and incidentally, how did the first writing happen? I'm glad to say this, but I'll just put it parenthetically right now. First writing happened as records of food trading that was a product of the civilization that people were in. So in essence, the first writing was in Mesopotamia, and the Mesopotamian cuneiform writing literally is in the first records. They had to keep records of the surpluses that particular evolutionary revolution that they were in, the formation of agriculture and the first utilization of irrigation, which ties into what I said last night about irrigation, that initial was so productive that it gave rise to civilizations. It was the fundamental economics of civilizations. Because before there was cash, there was trade, but you had to keep track of the trade. And you traded various goods for various other goods, etc. And that was the record system that was developed, was on a cuneiform tablet. Fortunately, it was on a cuneiform tablet because unlike this or the internet or any of the things that we depend upon, it'll all be gone and erased and nobody will they will wash off for sure. But in any event, my point is though clear. Their tablets we can read now because they were etched in stone and were stone glass. And I think there may be a message about what our history is inherent in that. Nevertheless, my second point that I'll be going through today is that myth, ritual, and tradition is largely evolves around the success that it gives you in a new form, not the memes, but maybe the creams, if you will. The creams, or whatever you want to call it, sort of like chromosomal memory. In other words, it's integrated, it's elaborated, and it maintains itself over time. So we need to think about the conserving nature of religions, and maybe that's its huge selective advantage for the populations that practice those particular traditions. So think about that as I'm going through today. Okay. Having said that, let's just go into this a little bit further. So there are two diagrams that I'll be using today that I think that are key to my conceptualization of what's going on. The first one on the upper side has several squares here, or several rectangles, of key variables that were involved in the previous chart that I just showed you on the relationship between brain and social cultural evolution and the continued elaboration of the brain, the human brain, over evolutionary times. But this is just a general scheme of up on the top of this, of what time one and time two is. In other words, it's in an equilibrium, and these equilibria shift over time, and but there are biological, social, cultural, demographic, and environmental variables to this that are very important to understand. But the second one is an elaboration of this diagram. And this diagram still has the arrow of time going through it. Right here. And now, instead of the biological, it elaborates some to talk about really relationships to food now. And this is the human food chain, or the human food system, elaborated from my own research. And this is, I would say a lot of people use this now. But this is an ecosystem with both agricultural products and infectious diseases that might be present. A very important evolutionary factor in there. There may be pathology that come from all this, so we need to understand we can't stop at the act of consumption. We need to know what happens after we consume something. How many people in this room know somebody with a food sensitivity? Look at this, look around. And how did this happen? It happened because of what I'm going to be talking about to you. There has been a dramatic shift in our diets, and we're eating a lot of things that we never evolved to eat. And that's a very interesting concept, so we'll come back to that metabolically. So it happens, so we can't just stop at the act of consumption. We must go back beyond that. And within the ecosystem, of course, we have all these population factors operating within the system. And when we talk about an agricultural system like the one we're in right now, we have to talk about the food chain with respect to that. So there are issues of storage, distribution, and processing that are involved very much in the food system, the food chain as we conceive of it right now. But then, the actual preparation of the food, the cuisine, the meal, and the symbolism, the food traditions are all tied up into one. These are really important steps. And you will start to see, and I'm going to share with you the first time on a few new pieces of the evidence that I've been accumulating in the scientific research that I've been doing for many years on this today. So I'll be talking about some new pieces of this. So here are some of the revolutions that have occurred. There's first, let me talk about the way you get this onto one graph. So this is the log base 10 of time before the present. So this is log scale of time. So the mathematicians will have an easy time. This is millions. This is hundreds of thousands in essence. And this is, the 10 with the 5 zeros involved, the hundreds. This is the thousands, etc. My point is that a lot of time was spent, and if you look at population size, it's our success of in terms of the ecosystem that I just talked about, in terms of the environment that we live in, that there were these revolutions occurring. And what happened with each of these revolutions, we pushed the carrying capacity around tremendously. The carrying capacity was altered literally at the very beginning of human evolution, or Homo evolution, because we suddenly had a gene deletion for the myosin that's necessary for the for our facial musculature to work. So suddenly there was a gene deletion about 2.4 million years ago, estimated, where our facial musculature got much smaller. So it led to a small face, hopefully a cute face, because that became very important. And a small face that ultimately lacked the capacity to do what those in our population who had big faces and huge jaws to go with them, and powerful muscles to crack open a nut or break open a bone, etc. So what do? I won't hit this hard because I don't have the whole show here. But what we did is we had a tool and we put that nut on here and we banged it. I won't bang it here, but you get the message. The point is that we use tools, and we continuously use tools right from the beginning. And we weren't the only users of tools at that point. Tools were being used by the other hominids at that point in time. But we became completely dependent upon these to really survive. And that pushed us in a different direction, so to speak. So that began to push us. So our ability to get food was suddenly subverted by a gene deletion. You would think that would die off right away, but I would argue maybe the combination of cuteness and the cleverness that goes with adapting around that was clearly a factor. Cuteness, incidentally, is, if you think about why cuteness, cuteness is what a baby has. And what does a baby have? I still do a round face. So a baby has a round face, big eyes, small lower third of the face, very tiny lower third, very big upper third. And when you look at it in an evolutionary direction, it's crystal clear that cuteness factor becomes incredibly important for the necessary attachment that has to occur between mother and infant and maintained, because babies, in human terms, take a huge amount of time before we grow and develop to the point of being adults, and the transfer of information that goes on between generations is enormous in humans, by far the largest of any of the primates. So we have a great amount to learn, we have a great capacity to learn it, and that part of the cuteness keeps them attracted to us, and in fact probably is involved in the release of oxytocin, actually, when we look at a cute baby. So it's an interesting thing, and we transfer that cuteness even to gender selection as well. So a girl's face is very easy to track right from childhood because she doesn't change in her mid-third of her face. So women's faces tend to be much smaller underneath, but male faces change completely because we have a huge development that occurs in adolescence. Muscularity, our mid-third of our face grows dramatically, and we have a new level of maturation occurring. And so a girl's face can be easily spotted, and girls use makeup and all these other things to maximize the size of the upper third of the face. So all that now that women all over the world have used now is being used in our society. And industries are based upon the use of that to emphasize a certain quality. It's really important to understand these things because those underlie some of these initial things that get going and become biologically part of who we are, biologically part of, and then biopsychologically, biocognitively who we are. So these things become more sophisticated over time, and of course the thing that really becomes dramatic in that process early on is speech and its elaboration. So speech is probably not too elaborate until later on, but it's there, and it's a huge advantage that it gives for communication. Needless to say, it gives me a huge advantage, I hope, today. I'm trying to communicate with all of you, so it's important to, to be able to use this tool, if you will, that we all have. So, and that leads to sophisticated hunting and gathering, and initial use of fire. So initial use of fire happens way before the present. That's a very important evolutionary distinction. So that really begins the second revolution that occurs, because we now have a means through the use of fire. We now have a means through the use of fire to actually cook foods that couldn't be digested beforehand. So if I eat yesterday, the day before yesterday, I guess most of you weren't here, they served very delicious mashed potatoes. If I tried to eat a mashed potato that was not cooked, two things would happen. One, three things would happen. One, it would taste terrible, quite honestly, because there's some toxic qualities that are eliminated by the cooking process. That's one thing. The second thing is that I'd probably get sick from the solanines in the head. So it would be digestively inappropriate for me to consume it. But the third thing is I would get practically no energy value out of it. A cooked starch is a hydrolyzed starch. Hydrolysis of the starches means that they're open for digestion. And one of the earliest things to happen in human evolution, right in here, is being tracked out, right in this period of time, is the enzyme that controls salivary amylase. Amylase is the enzyme that breaks down starch to sugar, clearly evolved in humans. So what we have is the capacity to process lots of starch to sugar long before agriculture occurred. Long before agriculture occurred. And guess what? Now we understand. That's what I was looking for originally. But I don't see Sandy here in the audience today. But I was going to show a slide that I couldn't find right now on one of my other files here, of the Paleolithic, stone Paleolithic dolls. The Paleolithic dolls, they so-called fertility dolls. There were about 130 of them that have been found throughout history in the Paleolithic. That is over a period of going back at least 35,000 years. Are all obese, but they're not obese in exactly the same way. They're over thousands of years. Why would you expect them to have an image of obesity that would always be the same? Why would you expect them to, in a sense, imitate some of the things they already knew and were creating effigies around? So my point is simple, that obesity probably occurred as well with the origins of fire, because the excess capacity to produce glucose, which is absolutely necessary for central nervous system function. So our cortex was bathed in exactly what it needed to produce the brain capacities that we have. So there's a huge advantage to this. But the disadvantage is that if you eat too much of it, you can get fat. And you can get fat long before we had cafeterias and et cetera, et cetera. So we have to think about the origins of obesity being a completely different thing than we have in the past. So I think that this is something we're working on right now. In fact, we're writing up 2 papers on this. The next revolution, of course, is the agricultural domestication of plants and animals. That's a key piece of the puzzle. That then takes a complete new turn from the barrier, if you will, that's out there. And the barrier, of course, the carrying capacity now is multiplied enormously, because we don't have to spend all of our energy carrying all those tools with us, going from one place to the next in order to procure the foods that we needed. Suddenly, we can stay in one place. And suddenly, not suddenly, over thousands of years this took place, but rapidly, in an evolutionary sense, suddenly there was the appearance of all these new possibilities. But there were limitations, and that's what my talk is going to be about, the limitations that this produced. You went from a diet of plenty, a diet of the Garden of Eden, in a sense. So the Garden of Eden, if you think about it, in one way of interpreting it, is an exodus from the Garden of Eden to the hard work and the toil of the fields of agriculture. Before that, you could wander, in essence, and find the richness of the land and hunt and collect varieties of plants and animals and maybe other organisms that don't fit into those 2 categories, and consume those as well. So there was a tremendous amount of knowledge, but now there was a tremendous amount of productivity that this supported, and then became a new evolution. So there's another revolution, and that revolution starting about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, depending upon how you want to look at it. We'll go into more detail on that. But the bottom line is that there was the domestication of plants and animals is the key issue. And the selective breeding and processing going on, and the food processing that goes with it is the origin of cuisine, and I would argue that the origin of cuisine and the origin of religious traditions around food that we were hearing about today are literally tied up in the exact same envelope, and they're selectively reinforcing one another. Think about it as a selection of religious practices to reinforce the appropriate and the best opportune system of food, and I will provide evidence of this. So there's a dispersion that goes on, and last night really was talking about the contemporary issues that started around in approximately, well, depending upon how you want to look at it, several thousand or 500 years ago or 600 years ago, with a tremendous dispersion. The greatest dispersion of them all was not the discovery of the New World, it was the transfer and the gold or whatever they thought they were going to find. It was the transfer of the plants from the New World to the rest of the world. And if you look carefully at the Columbian documents that were collected at the time, that is the ship's logs, etc., and all they had naturalists, and that's the first discovery in tobacco was a naturalist discovery. So they were ready for it. They were looking for spices that would clearly take the place of Viagra for the males of the 600 years ago. They didn't necessarily find any, but they transformed the whole world in the process. And that was a really important development. Well, we'll not talk about the science. I talked about all the other revolution last night, so I'm not going to talk about that. At least right this point. Try and get to the next slide. Here it is. So, in essence, last night I presented this slide, talking about where we are now in this huge growth in population size. And we are faced with a real problem. No question about the real problem is, can we support this with the changing environment that we have? We have enormous change. We have enormous excess of population. The question is, do we overload these questions of carrying capacity? So here's a sigmoid growth curve that is typified for most organisms. And what we have here is the possibility that this is the carrying capacity, but when you have an overshoot, maybe like we have now, we may be destroying the capacity, we're degrading the carrying capacity, and that's one of the concerns that are out there right now, that we're degrading the carrying capacity of the planet to produce sufficient food to provide for the next generations. We do not know that, and that's one of the negatives. So until contemporary times, the old Malthusian conundrum that human population growth is exponential, but the growth of food resources is linear, has been clearly overcome by our information system, by the evolution of the way humans have been able to create new pathways to solving the problem. And we're doing that right now. And the question really is, for our conference, is where are we in this process? We don't know where we are. We just know that what we're looking for today and this week are solutions that we can enable, that will carry us through this piece of the puzzle as we get further along and potentially solve the problem of overpopulation. And I think there's plenty of evidence that we can use this week. So now I want to introduce something I was going to conclude with, but I decided because of time, you never know when the clock is going to run out, and all kinds of things happened before, people were coming in later, and we started late, so I figured I better finish early to make sure my point is made. And this is my point to my anthropological colleagues and sociocultural colleagues in the audience here, and food people, which is that this is about omnivores, and a new word that I'm introducing, ethnivores, and the biocultural evolution of the human diet. And I would say is we are much more an ethnivore than we are an omnivore. So The definition of a carnivore is an animal that consumes a diet consisting of almost exclusively animal meat. Omnivores consume both plant material and animal meat as their primary food source, while herbivores consume solely plant food. Okay, that's fine. That's nice, but what else does it tell us? Zippo, as far as I can see. Instead, what I think we need is a new concept. Ethnivore refers to human dietary consumption that is a product of an elaborate and well-defined set of bioculturally evolved local and regional food system practices, behaviors, and traditions that are transmitted from one generation to the next and have gradually evolved into dietary patterns that are nearly universal throughout our species. Since human populations occupy a very wide range of habitat and ecosystems, the use of the term omnivore provides an important further species-specific refinement of the more universal biological term omnivore that is defined as a species that consumes both plants and animals. In contradistinction, ethnivore helps characterize the particular set of important dietary variations that have evolved as coherent food traditions that specifically adapted to local, regional, geographic ecosystems. I'll be talking a lot about some people that I've worked with down in the Southwest. He's the Hopi. This is an old picture. Curtis made this top picture in 1909, I believe. It's staged, honestly. He went around and collected all these photographs of American natives and Native Indian people at their places where they were living. But the hairdos that these women have, talking about cute faces, these are all unmarried women. These are Hopi maidens, as they would have been called traditionally. And these are cornflower hairdos. And they're made very specifically to be attractive to this guy who is sitting here. I hope you can see him. I can't see him myself. Did I cut him? Oh, here he is. My screen is very tiny because it gets narrow in this process of being able to use this projector. Anyway, he's sitting here. He may not sit here all the time. He's looking over there. He's facing this way for the camera, if you will. And these are a little later in time, but these are, again, these are women, young women who are grinding corn. The Hopi people are a very unusual population. They live this way till today. They're deeply religious. Deeply religious. They have elaborate religious traditions all about corn. They live in the high desert of Arizona, very high levels, where there's practically no way you could survive. But they eked out a survival process where they have actually evolved a food tradition, and they are the longest living occupants of the same place, Old Arabis it's called, in the United States. So that's long before the Spanish were. They lived approximately 1,000 years ago, or more, a little more than 1,000 years ago, in the same community they still live in. Think about that for a city that's maintained in the high desert with no water and no anything, if you will. So how did they do this? They did this because, in some respects, there was no competition. No one else would ever want to live there because it was so dry and so barren, and therefore they didn't have to fight off anybody else until contemporary times, and now the Navajo have moved in, and their areas have become much smaller because of legal complications. But nevertheless, the point is that they lived in peace, and they lived in isolation. And in that process, they have a myth, an origin myth. Their origin myth is as follows. They say that all the other Indian tribes had different kinds of corn, and they were left with a very specific corn, a small ear of what they call blue corn. Blue. If you looked at this corn, it would not be blue. It's the same color as this, or even blacker than this device. The point I'm making is that the corn is at best steel blue, if you will, navy, more than navy blue, if you will, very, very dark. And it doesn't turn blue, even when you prepare it for cooking. It only turns blue at a
particular point in time. It turns blue, it turns out, when you add the right amount of what they call now, this is following my research with them, they've changed the story. You'll see the story, I've got a small video of the story, their origins, etc. The important point is that it changes blue color when it reaches the exact correct pH. That is the amount of acid and alkali that's present. The pH is slightly alkaline, and that pH is perfectly adapted to making the niacin, which is indigestibly bound in corn. So corn has this deep problem connected to it. And the deep problem connected to corn is that there is niacin there, but unless you cook it with an alkali, you cannot get the niacin out. So you can't digest it, you can't chew it, you can't swallow it, you can't boil it, etc. It doesn't come out until chemically until you touch it with an alkali. That's a really important distinction. You will see how important that was, because that led to a huge amount of research that I've done. So what they did to solve the problem is they did two things. Everybody else hits it with an alkali and hits it hard. So if you were in Mesoamerica, where corn became the basis of the civilization, then what you did is you treated the corn with a huge amount of alkali that you usually got from limestone. So if you burn limestone, you can actually make alkali from it. And that powder, you add that to the water that you're cooking water, you boil the corn in that, and guess what happens? The conversion is complete. But what you do is you lose lots of nutrients that you can't digest, because they're in the supernatant of the water, in the boiling water. They're in the boiling water, you have to wash off all this alkali, or it'll kill you to try and eat that corn the way it is. So you must get rid of the alkali that's present. And when you wash it off, they have plenty of running water, so they don't have the problem that the Hopi have, practically no water. But they have in the rest of these populations. And what they do is get rid of it quickly, and when you get rid of that water, the cooking water has a lot of nutrients in it. If you're the people in the high desert, like the Hopi, you do not have a choice of getting rid of the water. If you get rid of the water, if you had washing water, you're losing a lot of your nutrients. You can't afford that because every morsel counts. So if you look at these ladies grinding the corn, look at the fences around them, look at the trays, the way they're working. Those trays are designed, in essence, or evolved to keep every little morsel of dust. They have all kinds of little brushes they use to keep it in place, etc., etc. So this is really important. Every morsel counts. And a woman becomes attractive to this guy and to the males by the way she's grinding the corn. So she moves her body a little bit, and, etc., etc., as she grinds the corn. So the guys look in over the women. The women then produce this final food, and that final food is called piki. And piki is the measure of a woman's capacity to produce food. I work with Inuit people, Eskimo people, up in northern Alaska and northern Canada. And their judgment of a woman's capacity to be a good wife is her ability to chew the sinew to make clothing, because clothing is the necessary ingredient for survival. The necessary ingredient for survival amongst the Hopi is to get the piki to be exactly correct, to get the nutrient value out of it. Otherwise, survival is not possible. Survival is not possible. So there's tremendous selective advantage in this. Think about that and how that creeps into and supported by and evolves the religion of the population. So these are key issues that I wanted to introduce to start with, because this is where the real action is here. A second point that I'm going to make now, I suppose a little later on. The second point I want to make is that I'm trying to think of, I'm going to give you an example too. Second point is that we have capacity to detect a lot of things in our plants. I have a fantastic capacity to detect sweet in anything. I loved sweet things growing up, I was really into these things, so I would have gone on pastry tours if I could have, but I didn't very often. But I like to go and sample all these things. Anyway, but my ability to do that was my taste capacity. So we have that capacity built in. And I have the exact opposite. My wife, Pauline, would tell you, and I'm sure, that we eat a lot of vegetables in our house. But I don't like bitter ones. I reject them all the time. My sensitivity for bitter is very high. Some people are very low. Some people like, I'm thinking of the drink, the alcoholic drink that has the bitter in it, which is a total turn-off to me, if you will. So it gives you some idea. So we have the chemical senses and the taste. We have the aromatic senses, very elaborate. And there's plenty of evidence that human evolution has there are a lot of genomic changes that are involving our sense of smell. And it's very complicated. In fact, our sense of smell is very, very acute with respect to food. So we can detect the slightest aroma of something off, and that's it. Don't even touch that. I don't like the smell of that. I can remember the Chinese people did not use dairy at all when I first arrived in China. And the joke was amongst the Chinese people that were in China at the time, and this is in mainland China, that you could smell me coming down the street, across the street, because I had milk or something and a dairy in my diet. And you could smell this a mile away, so to speak, is the joke. Well, they've actually changed now. They're now trying to eat milk at a great cost, in my opinion, because of the metabolic problems that everybody raised their hands about. But the point is clear that there are shifts going on. So people can detect the aromas and accept or reject based upon what it smells like. So we have that capacity. We have another capacity. And the next capacity is the one I was trying to think of as an example. How many people here have gone out to a restaurant or any place and had gotten really sick from the food? How many has had food sickness? I'm going to take a look. Again, lots of hands. How many people of those who raised their hands can remember the details of their food sickness? Look at everybody getting ready. The same group raises their hands again. The point is that our memory of a bad episode is permanently etched in our capacity for memories. So Marcel Proust wasn't just reading the tea leaves. He was reading into something that was fundamental to what humans are all about, which is we have that vagal response that leads to sickness, if you vomiting and sickness, is a response that we never forget. And we build that into our ability. On the other hand, if the response is below the stomach, in the GI system, below the intestines and into the large intestine, we don't learn the message. We get sick and we continue to eat that food every day and try to figure out why we're sick. In essence, in other words, we have the capacity changes as we become from more proximal to more distal in terms of the cause and effect relationships between what we eat and what it does to us. Now take niacin. Niacin, the deficiency that produced in this corn that's bound to and changed by the process that these women are going to be using to extract the necessary nutrient. That niacin deficiency is a disease that we have identified, and it changed American history when it occurred. I did an analysis of this in Google in words. There are a very interesting graph I just made of this. There's a new database of occurrence of words in books. And you can show categorically that the word pellagra, which was the disease that was present, and everybody thought in the early 1900s that was widely prevalent in the United States, that it was an infectious disease because that was the model we had. Infectious disease must be producing this. Well, the fact of the matter is that it was not an infectious disease. It was a deficiency of niacin. And no one knew this because everybody was eating corn, particularly in the southern part of the United States, and it's produced an enormous disadvantage. And a guy named Goldberger discovered this, and in the early 20s he wrote it up, and people would not believe what he wrote. Scientifically, he had the evidence, but people wouldn't believe the evidence for another 15 to 20 years. Some people believed it, but lots continue to eat the corn, and lots continue to have pellagra just the way they had it before. And it wasn't until the Second World War that it all got cleared up. And that's what led to the vitamin addition to foods in the United States. So that's when the FDA required it to be added to things like white bread. So Wonder Bread was Wonder because it produced, it had other B vitamins in it too, but niacin was the primary, if you will, mover of this. And then vitamin D, of course, milk, etc. So it led to all these changes. But think about how long a period of time this was. We did not discover it in the West with our traditions until the lifetimes of some of the older people in this room. Think about that. Think about it. I can remember Wonder Bread as a child. I can remember it very clearly. That was a really important development at the point. And now we sort of we now scoff at the white bread, if you will. But the point is it was a major revolutionary change in human diets in the United States and in elsewhere. So what do we have? We had a very unusual thing occur. The very unusual thing is that these people, the Hopi, and all the Mesoamericans, had actually evolved the technologies to extract the alkali. But the fact of the matter is that when Columbus first contacted them in 1492 and 93, said that they brought corn back, and corn was immediately used as a crop because there was this amazing crop that they were growing here in the Western world that might be useful back in Europe. And they grew it, but they never took the recipe. Recipes was something that women did. That wasn't something that men were concerned with growing food, feeding the family, if you will. But the point is that the recipe never got transferred and never evolved on its own. So it means that the distance, so it isn't like my ability to smell or taste or get sick from the food. The ability to get sick from a vitamin deficiency takes weeks to develop, or months. The 4 Ds, and diarrhea, dementia, dermatitis, and death are the outcomes of a vitamin deficiency. So it's a very serious disease. But the knowledge, the evolution of that knowledge wasn't there. It doesn't happen easily because there's a distance between the cause and effect relationship that we can detect at one level versus the other level. And that cause and effect, therefore, had to evolve in a different way. And I would argue it does not evolve directly from the scientific knowledge that we now have of the cause and effect relationship. It evolves indirectly in an evolutionary way within a culture, and it gets embedded in the cultural tradition. So it's a survival thing, in a sense, and it gets reinforced. And when you think about the Hopi reinforcing something, a young woman now that I started to talk about, she's going to prepare this, we're going to see the preparation of tiki in a moment. The preparation of that bread that has all the necessary ingredients for survival in that high desert region where the ecosystem can't support you or shouldn't be supporting you, literally is brought out in tiki. Tiki becomes the key. So a young woman, one of the traditions is that a young woman in Hopi land, the woman proposes to the man. How do you like that? So you guys can just sit there and wait for your proposals to come in. But what does the proposal look like? The proposal is a little pile of tiki bread that she leaves at your doorstep. Okay? So if you say, hey, have you been looking at this guy has been doing in the corner of this picture? If you were looking over all these young women and say, she gave me that, I don't even want a tiki bread from her. You know? So you reject it. There's something you don't like about her. She can do her hair right, whatever it is, I don't know. But the body, she wasn't cute enough for me. Okay, let's put it that way in the context of my talk. My point to you is clear, that she proposes to me now, and I've got my blue shirt on, so I'm really into tiki. And blue becomes the key symbol of the color of the whole society. Fromness, it is their origin myth of themselves. And they maintain this. On their website, they say they divert from scientific explanations to say that they know how they originated because this is their sense of who they are. Just as every religious group knows how they originated and has their own sense of who they are. And that identity is crystal clear right to this day. So in their case, now going back to the piggy on my doorstep, so now, hey, I like her, she's really nice. I'm going to take in the piggy bread and I'm going to eat it. And guess what? I like it. That's good. And she's very happy because now I say, well, I've accepted you as a potential bride. Okay? But my mother says to me, wait a minute. Who made the piggy bread? Did she really make this piggy bread? And I said, I don't know. Maybe she made the bread, maybe she didn't. I don't know. Well, what I do if I'm the mother-in-law, now I'm the mother-in-law, her mother, future mother-in-law, or my mother, says to her, come on, you can come and visit us and spend 2 weeks making piggy bread in my house so I can see whether you are suitable enough for my son. And if you're not, go back, go back and learn how to make piggy because you're not good enough to marry my son. Talk about evolutionary selection. Talk about evolutionary selection. Talk about this. And now, what is the meaning of all this? Let's go for it. If I can. Okay, so I've been doing, scientifically, let me just say what I do. There are two things. First off, in this stage 1 up here, or let's go to the low one. I'm testing hypotheses about, in the scientific sense, I'm testing hypotheses about the evolution of human diet. There's biochemistry, pharmacology, the nutritional sciences, etc. So this is where I start my research. I'm a scientist, I come into this looking at it scientifically and saying, there's some nutrient deficiency or there's something else that's really interesting about this. And I'll tell you what I've discovered right now. I've discovered, it turns out, that these factors operate in every single major food that we eat. All of the dietary constituents, all of them, all of the ones that we've evolved through agriculture, have all kinds of nutritional limitations in them. All kinds. And if we don't know what those limitations are, we can't possibly survive off of this. And guess what? We did not know what they were. And way before science came along, they had to evolve. There was an evolutionary process. And I'm trying to understand that evolutionary process, and I'm giving you the evolution of this in the piggy bread today as an exemplar of how it works. So we know that an alkali breaks a bond, a chemical bond, a non-acetin bond. Corn is really the most productive crop in the world in a sense. It really is an incredibly productive crop, and its capacity to increase productivity just continues on up, as I showed you last night. We don't know if it's going to continue because, in fact, Bill McKibben talked about why it failed in the drought last summer. It failed because the temperature got too high for the pollination to work properly. But the important point here is from the point of view of preparing the food. So corn can be, everybody here, how many people have never eaten corn in their life? Has anybody here never eaten corn? So everybody here has eaten corn. So that's simple. 99% of the corn we eat, that we eat on the cob, is all fresh corn. This does not apply to fresh corn. It applies to when corn becomes a staple of your whole society. So when corn gets mature and you take it off and store the cobs, in essence, you keep the corn on the cobs and then scrape it off. It's that corn you've stored that's important. So the storage form of corn has this chemical bond in it. The chemical bond is not there in fresh corn. So you have fresh corn, but you can't have fresh corn. The productivity of this crop is seasonal. And you have that food for the whole season. While the season is on, you can't survive unless you know how to process it. So the niacin is present there. You eat the corn and maize with an alkali, and you break the chemical bond. Where do you get the alkali? You get the alkali from this square here, from the use of wood ashes, burned shells. Turns out I studied this in a population initially in Mexico, the traditional Mayan people who fled into the jungle. This is the Lacandon Mayan who were, when Cortez first arrived, they fled off into the jungle and never made contact until, again, with anybody outside until about the 1930s. And then they were sort of rediscovered there. So this is what I was doing. Now, did you want to take a picture of that thing? All right. Look quick, please. Okay.
So, what about hominy, which is made out from corn? Is that got the niacin in it?
It depends if it was cooked with an alcohol. So the answer is some of the hominy is and some of it was not.
But it's made with lye.
Yeah, with the hominy that's made with lye, but there are recipes for hominy that's not made with lye, that's my point. Lye is a very strong alcohol, very strong alcohol. I'm going to ask questions later on, if you don't mind, unless I've screwed up on something, because we'll get away and then we'll all disappear for a long time. So what I did is, many years ago now, this is an experiment that I did many years ago, looked at the whole question of whether or not a tradition ever evolved to use an alkali with corn, and looked at the degree of cultivation of populations that used and did not use alkali, the degree of consumption and cultivation. So it's two different factors we measured in that. And we went to what is called the Human Relations Area Files in anthropology, which lists all these different databases on societies. And you can actually track out all those societies, all those Indian populations in the New World that have the circles on them. All of those were alkali users. All the ones with the dots on them, including some of these living in the same areas that they were living in, did not use alkali. So the hypothesis is that the use of alkali relieved a total limiting function on the capacity to survive off of this, and therefore led to a much higher degree of consumption and production of corn, and became the basis for their civilizations. Testing the hypothesis is statistically, of course, is almost humorous, because all the zeros that are in this are where it's ecologically possible to raise corn, but they never evolved this group, they never even used corn. But some of these did use corn, but never evolved the alkali strategy, if you will. And as you get up the ladders, you can see the high consumption, high consumption. It's as if you step through a window, and the latch controlling the window is the use of alkali, and you move into a new world where you can depend upon corn and build a civilization, and have all the elaboration that occurs with civilization, including their religious traditions, which are the storehouse of the technologies when the cause and effect relationship is so distal from it that you can't possibly understand cognitively how it works. So blue corn is there. Everything is blue among the Hopi tradition, as you can see. These blues are not unusual. This is one of their classic paintings, if you will, of blue corn traditions. This is that steel blue color that I was talking about, and it doesn't turn blue until a later stage. So here is then testing the hypothesis within a particular ecosystem. So what she does is a Hopi maker. Here's a traditional one. Here is one of the Curtis 1922 pictures showing the same tradition. Today I'll show you in a video in a moment. So here is a Hopi pinky maker. At that point, she is going to use this stone as a fire under this stone, the pinky stone, and the stone has got a very interesting history that I'm not going to talk about today, but it's very important. It's a whole religious tradition just related to the use of the stone and all the rituals connected to the stone that you're going to cook the most important food in your life. In fact, the food that you're going to survive with for your whole life. So it's really important to understand that. In addition to that, you're making the pinky, and as you can see, it's gray here, but in fact it does turn blue when you have the right amount of alkali added to it before in the process of making the pinky. So you'll see the corn churn color, and it's the color and the way the color gets integrated entirely into their culture, and the way the color becomes the key to their origin myth, that it's the key to who gets married, it's the key to who succeeds, and it's a key to every important ritual in your life. It's amazing. And it gets over-determined this way because this is the only way you can survive in that particular environment where you can live out a peaceful life and a life of hard but possible with all kinds of amazing traditions.
So here we'll start. Okay, I can do that right. I'm looking for this. Oh, here it is. I was looking for that arrow to show up. Listen to this sound. Just a second. I'm going to stop for a second and just tell you one thing about that sound. That sound is taking the corn off the cob and you put it into a basket. And the corn has lots of dust and little stones on it. So before you grind it into this very fine powder that's going to be used, the flour, for making the piki, you have to get rid of the dust and stone, etc. that's on there. And what you do is you shake it in this basket and you flip it a little in the basket and you get rid of, and the stuff falls right through the basket. Today, to commemorate that at happy hour, I brought blue corn chips and I brought one of their Hopi baskets, the winnowing basket that you hear the sound of this, as a way for you to see how this works. I don't want you to do this on the floor of the happy hour. The corn chips, the blue corn chips I have are blue. I don't know exactly how they got to be blue, honestly. They're out of a bag, 2 different brands, and you can all sample one to get a taste. Because taste, look, how do we learn this? It isn't that we learned about that restaurant that we all got sick at or whatever thing that made us sick. We learn from experience with food. And these are very powerful systems for experience. So you're going to have that opportunity to experience that if you come to the happy hour today. It's a big opportunity for you. So now, look. So the sound.
Whiskey is an integral part of Hopi life and ceremony. The ground cornmeal, while scalding water is stirred into the meal and into a container with approximately 1/3 to 1/2 cup of grease with ashes. The ash liquid mixture is strained into the cornmeal and stirred quickly into the dough, which immediately changes the color to deep blue. The chemical changes from the ash fluid activates nutritional values of the beef. As the mixture cools, it is kneaded by hand into soft dough.
See the blue color?
Or dry cornmeal. Careful kneading is important and should never be overlooked by a piki maker. Cold water is added in small portions until the desired consistency is achieved. Several other preparations are made, such as cleaning and organizing the beef wool and getting a supply of properly chopped wool and kindling. In the early morning, she sets a fire under the beaten stone and starts slowly heating it. She seats herself comfortably with sticks around her in easy reach and begins. One session of beef making takes almost a full day and yields an average of about 80 to 90 rolls of beef. Taking a small amount of batter in the top portion of her hand,
Several squares here, or several rectangles, of the key variables that were involved in the previous chart that I just showed you on the relationship between brain and social-cultural evolution and the continued elaboration of the brain, of human brain, over evolutionary time. But this is just a general scheme of up on the top of this, of what time 1 and time 2, it's in other words, it's in an equilibrium, and these equilibria shift over time, and but there are biological, social, cultural, demographic, and environmental variables to this that are very important to understand. But the second one is an elaboration of this diagram. And this diagram still has the arrow of time going through it, right here. And now, instead of the biological, it elaborates some to talk about really relationships to food now. And this is the human food chain, or the human food system, elaborated from my own research. And this is, I would say a lot of people use this now. But this is an ecosystem with both agricultural products and infectious diseases that might be present. Very important evolutionary factor in that. There may be pathology that come from all of this, so we need to understand we can't stop at the act of consumption. We need to know what happens after we consume something. How many people in this room know somebody with a food sensitivity? Look at this, look around, look around. And how did this happen? How did this happen? It happened because of what I'm going to be talking about to you. There has been a dramatic shift in our diets, and we're eating a lot of things that we've never evolved to eat. And that's a very interesting concept, so we'll come back to that metabolically. So it happens, so we can't just stop at the act of consumption here. We must go back beyond that. And within the ecosystem, of course, we have all these population factors operating within the system. And when we talk about an agricultural system like the one we're in right now, we have to talk about the food chain with respect to that. So there are issues of storage, distribution, and processing that are involved very much in the food system, the food chain as we conceive of it right now. But then the actual preparation of the food, the cuisine, the meal, and the symbolism, the food traditions are all tied up into one. And these are really important steps. And you will start to see, and I'm going to share with you the first time on a few new pieces of the evidence that I've been accumulating in the scientific research that I've been doing for many years on this today. So I'll be talking about some new pieces of this. So here are some of the revolutions that have occurred. There's first, let me talk about the way you get this onto one graph. So this is the log base 10 of time before the present. So this is log scale of time. So the mathematicians will have an easy time. This is millions. This is hundreds of thousands in essence. And this is, the 10 with the 5 zeros involved, the hundreds. This is the thousands, etc., and hundreds on that. My point is that a lot of time was spent. And if you look at population size, it's our success of in terms of the ecosystem that I just talked about, in terms of the environment that we live in, that there were these revolutions occurring. And what happened with each of these revolutions, we pushed the carrying capacity around tremendously. The carrying capacity was altered literally at the very beginning of human evolution, or Homo evolution, because we suddenly had a gene deletion for the myosin that's necessary for the for our facial musculature to work. So suddenly there was a gene deletion about 2.4 million years ago, estimated, where our facial musculature got much smaller. So it led to a small face, hopefully a cute face, because that became very important. And a small face that ultimately lacked the capacity to do what those in our population who have big faces and huge jaws to go with them, and powerful muscles to crack open a nut or break open a bone, etc. So what do? I won't hit this hard because I'll end the whole show here. But what we did is we had a tool that we put that nut on here and we banged it. I won't bang it here, but you get the message. The point is that we use tools, and we continuously use tools right from the beginning. And we weren't the only users of tools at that point. Tools were being used by the other hominids at that point in time. But we became completely dependent upon these to really survive. And that pushed us in a different direction, so to speak. And so that began to push us. So our ability to get food was suddenly subverted by gene deletion. You would think that would die off right away, but I would argue maybe the combination of cuteness and the cleverness that goes with adapting around that was clearly a factor. Cuteness, incidentally, is, if you think about why cuteness, cuteness is what a baby has. And what does a baby have? I had I still do, a round face. So a baby has a round face, big eyes, small lower third of the face, very tiny lower third, very big upper third. And when you look at it in an evolutionary direction, it's crystal clear that that cuteness factor becomes incredibly important for the necessary attachment that has to occur between mother and infant and maintain, because babies, in human terms, take a huge amount of time before we grow and develop to the point of being adults, and the transfer of information that goes on between generations is enormous in humans, by far the largest of any of the primates. So we have a great amount to learn, we have a great capacity to learn it, and that part of the cuteness keeps them attracted to us, and in fact probably is involved in the release of oxytocin, actually, when we look at a cute baby. So it's an interesting thing, and we transfer that cuteness even to gender selection as well. So a girl's face is very easy to track right from childhood because she doesn't change in her mid-third of her face. So women's faces tend to be much smaller underneath, but male faces change completely because we have a huge development that occurs in adolescence with muscularity. Our mid-third of our face grows dramatically, and we have a new level of maturation occurring. And so a girl's face can be easily spotted, and girls use makeup and all these other things to maximize the size of the upper third of the face. So all that now that women all over the world have used now is being used in our society. And industries are based upon the use of that to emphasize a certain quality. It's really important to understand these things because those underlie some of these initial things that we get going and become biologically part of who we are. Biologically part of, and then biopsychologically and biocognitively who we are. So these things become more sophisticated over time, and of course the thing that really becomes dramatic in that process early on is speech and its elaboration. So speech is probably not too elaborate until later on, but it's there, and it's a huge advantage that it gives for communication. Needless to say, it gives me a huge advantage, I hope, today. I'm trying to communicate with all of you, so it's important to be able to use this tool, if you will, that we all have. So, and that leads to sophisticated hunting and gathering, and initial use of fire. So initial use of fire happens way before the present. That's a very important evolutionary distinction. So that really begins the second revolution that occurs, because we now have a means through the use of fire. We now have a means through the use of fire to actually cook foods that couldn't be digested beforehand. So if I eat yesterday, or the day before yesterday, as most of you weren't here, they served very delicious mashed potatoes. If I tried to eat a mashed potato that was not cooked, two things would happen. Three things would happen. One, it would taste terrible, quite honestly, because there's some toxic qualities that are eliminated by the cooking process. That's one thing. The second thing is that I'd probably get sick from the solanines that are in it. So it would be digestively inappropriate for me to consume it. But the third thing is I would get practically no energy value out of it. A cooked starch is a hydrolyzed starch. Hydrolysis of the starches means that they're open for digestion. And one of the earliest things to happen in human evolution, right in here, it's being tracked out, right in this period of time, is the enzyme that controls salivary amylase. Amylase is the enzyme that breaks down starch to sugar, clearly evolves in humans. So what we have is the capacity to process lots of starch to sugar long before agriculture occurred. Long before agriculture occurred. And guess what? Now we understand. That's what I was looking for originally. But I don't see Sandy here in the audience today. But I was going to show a slide that I couldn't find right now on one of my other files here, of the Paleolithic, stone Paleolithic dolls. The Paleolithic dolls, they so-called fertility dolls, there were about 130 of them that have been found. throughout history in the Paleolithic. That is over a period of going back at least 35,000 years, are all obese. But they're not obese in exactly the same way. They're over thousands of years. Why would you expect them to have an image of obesity that would always be the same? Why would you expect them to, in a sense, imitate some of the things they already knew and were creating effigies around? So my point is simple, that obesity probably occurred as well with the origins of fire, because the excess capacity to produce glucose, which is absolutely necessary for central nervous system function. So our cortex was bathed in exactly what it needed to produce the brain capacities that we have. So there's a huge advantage to this. But the disadvantage is that if you eat too much of it, you can get fat. And you can get fat long before we had cafeterias and et cetera, et cetera. So we have to think about the origins of obesity being a completely different thing than we have in the past. So I think that this is something we're working on right now, in fact, in writing up 2 papers on this. The next revolution, of course, is the agricultural domestication of plants and animals. That's a key piece of the puzzle. That then takes a complete new turn from the barrier, if you will, that's out there. And the barrier, of course, the carrying capacity now is multiplied enormously, because we don't have to spend all of our energy carrying all those tools with us, going from one place to the next in order to procure the foods that we needed. Suddenly, we could stay in one place. And suddenly, not suddenly, over thousands of years this took place, but in an evolutionary sense, suddenly there was the appearance of all these new possibilities. But there were limitations, and that's what my talk is going to be about, the limitations that this produced. You went from a diet of plenty, a diet of the Garden of Eden, in a sense. So the Garden of Eden, if you think about it, in one way of interpreting it, is an exodus from the Garden of Eden to the hard work and the toil of fields of agriculture. Before that, you could wander, in essence, and find the richness of the land and hunt and collect varieties of plants and animals and maybe other organisms that don't fit into those 2 categories, and consume those as well. So there was a tremendous amount of knowledge, but now there was a tremendous amount of productivity that this supported, and then it became a new evolution. So there's another revolution, and that revolution starting about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, depending upon how you want to look at it. We'll go into more detail on that. But the bottom line is that there was the domestication of plants and animals is the key issue there. And the selective breeding and processing going on, and the food processing that goes with it, is the origin of cuisine. And I would argue that the origin of cuisine and the origin of religious traditions around food that we were hearing about today are literally tied up in the exact same envelope, and they're selectively reinforcing one another. Think about it as a selection of religious practices to reinforce the appropriate and the best opportune system of food, and I'll provide evidence of this. So there's a dispersion that goes on, and last night really was talking about the contemporary issues that started around in approximately, well, depending upon how you want to look at it, either several thousand or 500 years ago or 600 years ago, with a tremendous dispersion. The greatest dispersion of them all was not the discovery of the New World, it was the transfer and the gold or whatever they thought they were going to find. It was the transfer of the plants from the New World to the rest of the world. And if you look carefully at the Columbian documents that were collected at the time, that is the ship's logs, etc., and all they had naturalists, and that's the first discovery of the tobacco was a naturalist discovery. So they were ready for, honestly, they were looking for spices that would clearly take the place of Viagra for the males of the 600 years ago. They didn't necessarily find any, but they transformed the whole world in the process. And that was a really important development. Well, we'll not talk about the science. I talked about all the other revolution last night, so I'm not going to talk about that now. At least right this point. I'm going to try and get to the next slide if I can.